Hello, everybody. Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership. Hope everybody's doing great today, and thank you for joining our webinar of the quarter. It's called Grit, How Teams Persevere to Accomplish Great Goals. And we'll go ahead and get started. And just so you know, we are recording this, so if it works for you, you can share it with other people. So let's get going. As I promised when I sent this out, it would take about 20 minutes, and I'll be glad to take questions at the end. If you have any questions as we're going through, just put those in chat, and we'll cover those. So let's get rolling. There we go. All right. So this webinar is really designed to help you and your team identify what it takes to dig deep, to persevere, and deliver on a collective goal, demonstrating a set of skills we call grit. Now, not everyone has grit, but everyone is capable of developing grit. It starts with creating habits around leading oneself. It's really about cultivating grit on your team. It's about building trust. It's taking a step back and preparing for performance. It's communication. It's developing a perspective to lead. And last but not least, it's about achieving a common purpose on your team. Now, the how is really what we're going to get into. And this whole idea of cultivating grit really starts with taking a step back. Now, I call the 3 pillars of leadership, the self-reliant leadership 3 pillars. And I wanted to go through those real quickly. And this how is really about leading yourself. Socrates said, the famous 2 words of know thyself. This is really about you and people in your organization, on your teams, really taking ownership and personal responsibility for their own character development. Not only how they think and what they do, but how they make other people feel. When it comes to leading others, we spend a lot of time here. The who does what, but by when, and where do they do that work? A lot of the nitty gritty, and this is really about creating shared accountability. Now, one of the best guests we ever had on the podcast was a conductor from Colorado by the name of Brett Mitchell, and he famously said, a great conductor doesn't get people to play with each other. A great conductor gets people to play for each other. And I think as leaders, boy, if we've got a team where they are actually working for each other and holding each other accountable, boy, that makes our job a lot easier. And then we can do what we can do, and that is lead the organization, provide the why, and to figure out how do we create alignment, not silos, throughout the organization. Now, these 3 pillars require 3 things. One, on the ownership side, it's grit, which is what we're talking about today. And grit is persistence and determination during a difficulty. It's different than resilience, which is bouncing back from a difficulty. So we all know in the business world, there's always difficulties. There's always things to grind through, and we've got to persevere and be determined and keep the long-term objective in mind, even throughout the difficulties. With our team, this whole idea of shared accountability, what we'd really like to do is create a sense of duty, where people have a duty to themselves, to each other, to the organization, so that, if they don't do what they say they're going to do, they realize, boy, I've let myself down, the team down, the organization, and they know the ramifications of that. And the last part that's really difficult is to figure out how do I, balance the short-term and the long-term organizational goals and create a pace that's actually sustainable. We all know we can't do 90 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, just like going up a mountain. Sometimes we have to go slow, sometimes we go fast, sometimes we need to rest. Same thing with an organization. However, we can't really see fatigue the same way we can when we're out backpacking. So how do we do that in the business world? Well, let's start with those things that we talked about at the beginning, the recipe. The first thing we know, the building block of everything to do with a team is it's trust. Now, we know that trust usually occurs when people are vulnerable. It usually occurs when people do what they say they're going to do. But I think there's one other thing missing that builds trust, and that is allowing other people to make decisions, what we would call empowering people. Now, take a look at the antonyms here. Forbid, which is basically rules. And we all have rules that we have to abide by, but sometimes we don't think that those rules actually get in the way of empowering people. And then look at the other one down there, discourage. Think about the incentives that we might have that discourage people from being bold, from taking risks, or operating completely in fear. Now look at the synonyms of empower: allow, sanction, permit, vest, invest, endow, enable, embolden, encourage, galvanize. What these all require is that we give up power. Empower is giving power away. It means not having as much control, even though at the end of the day, you're the one accountable and responsible. That's a hard thing to do. But when we look at a lack of trust on a team, we really have to look in the mirror and say, have I really empowered my team and made it safe for them to feel emboldened to make decisions? So the next thing is really what we call preparing for performance. Now, my good friend Tom Morris, who got his start as a philosopher at Notre Dame, says that we're terribly vulnerable to unconscious assumptions, false beliefs, distorted values, unhealthy attitudes, inappropriate emotions, and unrealistic expectations. Now, he went on to say that self-knowledge is the foundation for appropriate and effective action. And the deepest practical thinkers have realized that one of the most enduring sources of power in this world is self-knowledge. So let me ask you, do you know your personal core values? Knowing what your values are, in other words, what you hold dear in life, will make you a grittier leader. When you need to make tough decisions as a leader, these prioritized values will make that decision much easier. Tough decisions are compounded when values aren't prioritized, or when we haven't recognized that some of our values actually compete. So something to think about. Now, the next thing that we had on there was communicating on your team with your team. And this is a really a simple concept. And that is, do we know if the communication sent, our intent, our expectation, was actually the communication that was received? Because if we do, then we know we have an aligned expectation. And I found that most of the miscommunication that happens in this world results in or is because of misaligned expectation. So oftentimes we spend so much time on accountability, and that's really focused on the past. Hey, here's what happened, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted to have happen. This whole idea of communicating is really focusing on setting the expectation so that you spend less time on the accountability down the road. So really important, simple concept. Now, the other part of this is developing the perspective to lead. And I believe that to really increase your grit, you have to take personal responsibility for your own growth and development. And so, part of looking at your own patterns of behavior over time is stepping back. It's creating some solitude, some white space. And in my opinion, it's putting that stuff down on paper. It's journaling. And I have 4 suggestions when it comes to journaling to make it really easy and simple. First thing in your journal, rate your day. And then ask yourself, well, what criteria did I use to rate a good day or a bad day? Were those criteria made up of things that you control, or were they external? Second, what are you grateful for? Why are you grateful for those things? And does that align with what you hold dear, your top values? Third, what'd you learn on this given day? Over time, how would you start to categorize what you're learning? Is it about you? Is it about others? Is it about the organization? Is it technical? What are you learning? And is that reflected in your values? And fourth, what is the single priority for tomorrow? And what will the outcome of that priority be? Now, keep in mind, I did not say priorities, plural. I said priority. What is the one thing that will move the needle? Recently, I was coaching someone, and at the top of their 2020 goals was, leave the office every day with an empty inbox. That was the top priority. This is a very senior executive. And I said, why is that a high priority? And he reflected and he thought, geez, that is not really what's going to contribute to me accomplishing all these other goals. And in fact, if I even include that as a priority, that might make it easy for me to make that a top priority and diminish some of the other things. So this is really about being very intentional, because as we all know, there's only two things we control. One is how we spend our time, and the second is how we respond to our environment. So the last thing I wanted to cover here was the whole idea of achieving a common purpose as a team. So a false summit is really when it looks like you're at the top, but you're not. And this whole idea of a common purpose is really, have we all agreed to the path we're on? So think about where you might have experienced some false summits with projects or initiatives at work. And have you talked about those with your team? What will you do when you notice a team member is working themselves to death? Chances are they might be incented because of fear. They might not want to ask for help, and that's resulting in overwork, burnout, and possibly micromanagement. So that's not good. And we all know that heroes are only born when the teams fail. If the team succeeds, there's never a need for a hero. So, when we have to keep in mind that when we see people working themselves to death, where did the team go wrong? It should never be reliant on one individual. What will you do when you are working yourself too hard? Good question. And what are some of the ways you can practice leading others where you have no formal authority? A lot of questions I get these days with folks that I'm working with is, hey, I'm good with my team. In other words, the people that have to do what you say. But I'm not doing as well with my peers or my boss or the board. Well, those people don't have to do what you say. So the question really is leadership a role, or is leadership an activity? I would contend that leadership is really all about influence. And even with a team, you can get people to do the things that you need them to if they report to you. That's called compliance. But to get others, including your team, your peers, your superiors, to do things that you'd like, that's about commitment. And that's about influence. That's not just getting people to think things and do things with their hand, but to feel things with their heart. And a much harder road to hoe. So last thing is, how can people get motivated from their team during difficult times? I often say people support what they help create. That slows things down, that changes your plan, but there's no other way that I know of to get people truly committed. So if we were to recap, and we'll take questions here in a sec, is, this recipe that we've talked about, it's really about cultivating grit on your team. It's about you being squared away physically, mentally, and emotionally. Because if you're not squared away, you're no good to your team. This also means what's implicit in this as a leader is you're going to have to sacrifice. You're going to have to get up earlier. You're going to have to get there earlier. You're going to have to do some sort of preparation that everybody else doesn't have to do. But you've got to be squared away. What we would call that in today's day and age is executive presence. Second thing is this foundation of trust, is to really think about, is my team empowered? A guest we had on the podcast recently was Horst Schulte, founder of the Ritz-Carlton. And he's famous for saying, we don't hire people to fulfill a function. We hire people to fulfill a purpose. And that's why everyone there at the Ritz knows the purpose is to keep customers. That's why everyone at the Ritz can spend up to $2,000 to take care of a customer without any management approval. They are empowered because they know the common purpose. Third, preparing for your performance. I have abbreviated these per James Clausen from the Darden School of Business as VABES: values, assumptions, beliefs, emotions, and expectations. Are you really clear on what your VABES are? And are you working hard to understand others? Because when we understand others' VABES, we really understand how to influence them, because we understand how they're motivated, how they think, how they process. Next one was communicating. And that is, it's one thing to know what the communication that was sent. Hey, I sent you a text, I sent you an email, I said this, I said that. But to really step back and say, was it received? A cute way of checking on whether it was received is to say, hey, I'm not sure what I just said, so tell me what you heard. Next one is developing perspective to lead, and the whole idea of solitude. And it's not incongruent with leadership, and it's not being selfish to create white space and a commitment to yourself on your calendar, because you are not effective going from meeting to meeting to meeting where you have no time to decompress and process or prepare. And remember, none of us are paid to be busy. Zero. We're paid to get results. We are not paid to be busy. And the last part was achieving a common purpose as a team and being very clear about what that path is. So in the words of Cervantes, this is really about, making it your business to know yourself, which can be the most difficult lesson in the world. So this is, what I've covered today is really based on the course that we recently launched through LinkedIn Learning called Grit: How Teams Persevere to Accomplish Great Goals. There's 5 videos that make up about 26 minutes, and it's out there. And if you don't have access to LinkedIn via premium and have access to LinkedIn Learning, just shoot me a note and I'll get you 30 days free, so you can see the entire course and see some of these things that we're talking about. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions that you have. You can put those through chat, and I'll be glad to take any of those. One of the questions I just got was on my perspective on remote and dispersed workers. What are the leadership implications for those folks? It's a great question. It's one we've been struggling with ever since technology's enabled more and more remote workers. It is absolutely the future. And it's difficult because we don't have the proximity to have those kind of relationships. The research suggests that no matter what, the leader's going to have to get on a plane at some point. You're going to have to develop face-to-face relationships. You're also going to have to spend some time with folks, more time than you would otherwise, because you don't have the chance encounters in the hallway. You don't have those things. The other thing is to think about some of the conference calls and the video interactions. Can some of those be unstructured and informal? Can they involve people getting to know each other a little bit more instead of just down to business? I've also found that using video is really helpful because it keeps us from multitasking the way we would if we were on our phone. So yeah, that's my thoughts on remote work. Any other questions? Another one coming in is the whole idea of time management that I mentioned, which sounds like an oxymoron to some these days. It is a difficult thing, and this goes back to know thyself and the things that you can control. Again, none of us are paid to be busy, and if a lot of what I spend time in coaching executives is this real simple concept. What do you hold dear? What is really important to you as far as your values and moving the business forward? What's important to you and fulfilling? All right, let's look at your calendar. Between your calendar and your bank account, we'll really know what you value. And is that really serving you well? Is the way that you're spending your time really going to get you where you want to go? Chances are no. So then let's look at your calendar in the form of a pie chart where you want it to be. some of the people I've most been impressed with on the podcast that have created great companies and developed leaders have spent up to 60% of their time developing their team. So if you look at where you want to be and where you are, the real crux is, well, how do you bridge that gap? How do you go from a day that looks crazy and frenetic to the one that looks more measured, where you're actually growing your company by developing your people and creating that white space and that time to think and to figure out, hey, I want to spend more time on making sure people have clear expectations than really spending time on where you at with this and this and this, the whole accountability that, boy, I've got to provide consequences because they're not doing what I asked, instead of taking the responsibility and saying, maybe I haven't been as clear. Maybe I haven't provided the right processes and systems and incentives and structure. Maybe that's what I need to work on. And that's what's going to drive the behaviors, not just, hey, we've got good people and bad people. You know, think of it like an intersection. You know, sometimes dangerous intersections aren't dangerous because people are bad drivers. They're dangerous intersections because the design is bad. And in some cases, you might need to design your work environment differently so that people behave differently. So, you know, something to think about. Any other questions? That looks like it. We're right at about 20 minutes, and that's my promise on these. They're short and sweet, hopefully. And as always, I really appreciate everybody coming on. And if you've got anything that you would like to see in future webinars, let me know. We've got a brand new website that just came up with all the online courses through LinkedIn Learning and Teachable, and those are all available to you and your team. So again, thank you for spending some time with me today, and we will see you next quarter, if not sooner. Thanks, everybody.